Chapter 812. At the same time, her longing for Xiao Qin increased at a crazy rate. Ninth Emperors, if you don't appear soon, your wife will be snatched away by someone else. She thought of Xiao Qin. Jingyu suddenly quieted down. According to the normal plan, Xiao Qin should have arrived at Baylor by now, but there was no news of him after so long. Could something have happened to Xiao Qin? Jingyu turned her body slightly and furrowed her brows. She thought of what Yuntian had said at that time, and her heart skipped a beat. Xiao Qin had gone to the royal city? Jingyu actually didn't know. The original plan was for Xiao Qin to take the main road to Baylor. Why would he go to the royal city? Jingyu had only agreed to Yuntian's words to disgust him. Hearing Yuntian's words, it seemed that something unexpected must have happened to Xiao Qin. Jingyu's body hadn't fully recovered yet. After a while, she fell into a deep sleep. When she opened her eyes again, it was already the morning of the next day. Jingyu sat up and raised her hand to move her arm. The pain made Jingyu grimace in pain. The wound hasn't healed yet. If you move again, it will split open again. Qin Bai's voice traveled over. Jingyu looked up and saw Qin Bai holding a few fruits in his hands. Only then did she know that this person had woken up early in the morning to look for food. I'm a patient. I want to eat meat. Jingyu stared at the few vegetarian fruits with a face full of hidden bitterness. You just took the antidote. You can't eat anything too oily. Qin Bai handed the fruits in his hands to Jingyu and said, just eat some fruits to fill your stomach. Jingyu glared at Qin Bai with hidden bitterness. It was good enough that she had something to eat when she was hungry. What was there to be picky about? Jingyu casually grabbed 2 fruits and gnawed on them. She stood up and looked around. It was a dense forest. She frowned at Qin Bai and asked, "Where did you find me?" "Just in front," Qin Bai replied. He looked at Jingyu and asked, "Can you walk?" "Big brother, my shoulder is injured, not my leg." Jingyu fiercely glared at Qin Bai as she spoke. You are wrong. You should call me husband, not big brother." Qin Bai's lips curled up. He coldly looked at Jingyu. "Stop. If you keep spouting nonsense, I won't bother with you anymore." Jingyu suddenly stopped. She stared at Qin Bai as if she wanted to swallow him alive. Qin Bai raised his eyebrows and said, "If you can walk, I'll take you to the place where I found you and see if your wolf is still there. Let's go. We'll eat while we walk." Jingyu stood up and walked away without another word. Being with Qin Bai made Jingyu's hair stand on end for some reason. Qin Bai led Jingyu to an empty space. Jingyu stood there and looked around. As expected, she found drag marks on the ground and Yinfeng's fur. Jingyu looked around and found some white powder in the dirt. Could it be that Yinfeng was taken away by the poison sect? Jingyu squatted down and gently rubbed the powder. Finally, she let go of her hand and slowly stood up. She looked around with a serious expression. "No, I have to find Lan first." Jingyu took a deep breath and stood up. "The forest is so big. Where are you going to find her?" Qin Bai stepped forward and stood beside Jingyu. "Since you're going to Baylor, why don't you wait in the city?" "You don't understand." Jingyu shook her head and turned to look at Qin Bai. Chapter 813. Baylor is even more dangerous to us. Linglan isn't familiar with the forest, so the place she'd go must be the one I've brought her to before. It's the best place to recuperate. Let me think about where she might be. Jingyu furrowed her brows and looked in a few directions. She then gritted her teeth and said, "We'll search every path. We must find Linglan before the poison sect does." Qin Bai furrowed his brows when he heard this. He was about to say something when Jingyu completely ignored him and walked forward on her own. Qin Bai's eyes flickered as he followed Jingyu step by step. He didn't say a word and simply followed her. "Hey, are you really going to keep following me like this?" Jingyu turned to glare at Qin Bai after walking for a while. "You're my fiancé. It's my responsibility to protect you." Qin Bai calmly raised his brows. His reply caused Jingyu's face to darken. She silently slapped her own mouth. "Who told you to be so nosy? Why did you have to ask this? If he wanted to follow me, then so be it. Once we find Yin Jian and Yinfeng, we'll be able to shake him off." Cough, cough. After walking for a long distance, Jingyu suddenly felt her body grow heavy. She clutched her chest with one hand and leaned against a tree trunk with the other as she gasped for breath and coughed. Qinbai stepped forward to support Jingyu's shoulders. Are you all right? Do you want to rest for a bit? Qinbai's tone was calm and gentle. His familiar voice startled Jingyu. She turned to look at Qinbai and stared blankly at his familiar face. She then raised a hand to push Qinbai away and took a deep breath. I'm fine. Qinbai furrowed his brows and slowly withdrew the hand Jingyu had pushed away. He placed it by his side and said, the poison in your body hasn't been completely purged. If you don't rest, you'll faint again. Qinbai, is your name really Qinbai? Jingyu acted as if she hadn't heard Qinbai's words. Her body was stooped and her head was lowered as she quietly asked her question. If I say no, what do you think my name is? When Qinbai heard Jingyu's question, his expression stiffened. His gaze towards Jingyu deepened and he fell silent for a moment before he slowly replied, Qinbai. No, you're not. Qinbai stared silently at Jingyu. In the end, he heard Jingyu say this. Not what? Qinbai's brows were deeply furrowed. You're not him. He's already dead. Jingyu lowered her head and seemed to laugh self-mockingly. Then, she turned around and walked away without any additional explanation. Qinbai stood where he was and watched Jingyu's departing figure. His brows were deeply furrowed. Jingyu searched silently the entire way. However, after walking for a day and going to many places, she still didn't find anything. Looking at the gradually darkening sky, Jingyu felt uneasy. According to the time, General Shangguan and the Crown Prince Consort should be arriving at Baylor soon. If she didn't manage to intercept them at Baylor and let them enter Luan City, it would be very troublesome. It's going to rain soon. Let's find a place to take shelter from the rain first. Qinbai looked up at the sky. The sound of the wind rustling the leaves was very loud and rustling Jingyu's hair. That woman with a slightly pale complexion didn't seem to want to give up no matter what. Chapter 8:14. This was probably the longest question Qinbai had asked Jingyu in all the time he'd spent with her. I really don't understand why you have to find her. If you do this, it's very likely that the poison sect will discover your tracks and you'll be in danger of losing your life. But you don't care at all. All you want to do is find her. Why is that? Haha. Jingyu froze when she heard Qinbai's question. Then she laughed and stared straight at Qinbai. Do you really know what it means to be together in life and death? Jingyu said indifferently. She didn't say anything else, nor did she answer Qinbai's question. She lifted her foot and continued walking forward. Qinbai froze in place as he carefully considered Jingyu's words. In the end, he sneered as if he didn't care at all. Then he expressionlessly followed Jingyu forward. There was a protruding rock in front of them that looked like a giant cave. It was perfect for hiding from the rain. Jingyu and Qinbai both saw that place and were about to walk towards it when they suddenly stopped. Jingyu's expression changed as she saw a figure slowly emerge from the rock. That figure was dressed in long, dark blue robes. He stood tall on the rock with his hands behind his back as he looked indifferently at Jingyu and Qinbai. Ninth Imperial Concubine, we meet again. Jingyu recognized Yuntian's face at a glance. I didn't expect. So you were rescued by Qinbai. Yuntian's gaze roamed between Jingyu and Qinbai. His eyes were cold as he said, You really saved me a lot of trouble. I really like killing two birds with one stone. You're a follower. Jingyu cursed viciously. Sticky candy. I can't shake you off no matter how hard I try. You sure are slow. Qinbai raised his head slightly to look at Yuntian. He was clearly in a lower position, but his aura did not relax in the slightest. He quietly stared at Yuntian and said, I thought that eldest young Master Yun would have found us yesterday. Who would have thought that it would take so long? You poison sect members are indeed trash. Jingyu stared at Qinbai in shock. Did she hear wrongly? Fuck. This elegant young master actually scolded people, and he scolded with such vigor. Qinbai, you don't have a single guard by your side, but you still dare to be so arrogant and humiliate my poison sect's people. I'd like to see if you'll still be so arrogant after this. Take him down. Yuntian's face instantly turned red from being called trash by Qinbai, and he fiercely gave the order. Just in time, a cold light flashed through Qin Bai's eyes as he watched the guard rush out of the dense forest. He reached for his waist and pulled out a soft sword. His figure was incomparably agile as he rushed forward. Jingyu stood in place, dumbstruck. So that pretty belt of his was used to store a soft sword? Jingyu didn't stay idle either. She mercilessly cut down anyone who rushed forward. However, Jingyu also discovered something very strange. Qinbai was practically taking care of everyone by himself. Anyone who reached Jingyu's side had been let in by Qinbai. He was protecting her. Jingyu frowned slightly. She spun around and charged into the crowd, breaking away from Qinbai's protection. Qinbai's expression changed slightly. He jumped to Jingyu's side and said, "Follow me?" "No need." Jingyu replied expressionlessly. Her every move was ruthless, causing Qinbai to raise his brows in surprise. Chapter 8:15. Thunder boomed in the sky, and large drops of rain began to fall. Jingyu's movements were too big, and she could clearly feel the wound on her shoulder opening up again. Fresh blood flowed out, and her clothes were soaked by the rain, staining her shoulder red. Qinbai saw Jingyu's shoulder at a glance. "Don't move." Qinbai's face turned cold, and he grabbed Jingyu's wrist, protecting Jingyu in his arms. "Qinbai." Jingyu's face turned cold, and she broke free from Qinbai's protection without hesitation. Her pitch-black eyes instantly turned dual-colored, and they shone with a threatening light in the rain. "Follow me. Let's kill our way out." Jingyu didn't say anything else, and she turned around and charged in a certain direction. Qinbai's eyes flashed with shock, and he hurriedly followed behind Jingyu, clearing the obstacles for Jingyu. The rain became heavier, and in the hazy curtain of rain, Jingyu and Qinbai's figures stumbled as they ran through the forest. The sky darkened, and Jingyu's dual-colored eyes shone with a dazzling light, identifying the path ahead. Cough, cough. Jingyu clutched her chest tightly and leaned against a tree trunk, gasping for breath. Qinbai turned around and saw that the people behind him had been temporarily left behind. Are you all right?" Qinbai stood in front of Jingyu, looking at Jingyu's pale face and bruised lips, and his brows furrowed slightly. "Let's go. There's a waterfall ahead. We have to go inside." Jingyu no longer had the strength to argue with Qinbai about how he called her. She clutched her chest and stood up. Qinbai half-supported Jingyu as they ran through the forest, allowing the rain to fall on their bodies. This time, it seemed like Yun Tian was determined to capture Jingyu and Qinbai. He actually sent out so many people, and they surrounded the two from all directions. Jingyu and Qinbai were once again surrounded. Jingyu tightly gripped the dagger in her hand, and she stared coldly at Yun Tian. "Don't run anymore. You won't be able to escape this forest." Yun Tian looked deeply at Jingyu and Qinbai as he spoke. "Is there something wrong with your head? If you have the ability, then don't chase. If you don't chase, then I won't run." Jingyu's face was getting paler and paler, and the dizziness in her head was getting worse. Her lips were bruised, and her black hair was wet and messy, sticking to Jingyu's face. Her black clothes were soaked by the rain, and they stuck to her body, showing off Jingyu's curvaceous body. Her heterochromatic eyes flashed with a seductive light, and she stared at Yun Tian with a gaze full of mockery. "Jingyu, don't you want to know where the wolf beside you went?" Yun Tian's face was slightly cold, and then he squinted his eyes and stared at Jingyu, saying, "As long as you're willing to stop, I promise I won't do anything to your wolf. How about it?" "Silver wind is indeed in your hands." Jingyu's face changed when she heard this. "Don't worry, I didn't do anything to it." Yun Tian smiled faintly and said, "However, if the 9th Imperial concubine doesn't stop, then I can't guarantee that I won't do anything to it." Ha ha ha. Jingyu was silent for a moment, then she suddenly laughed out loud. Her heterochromatic eyes emitted a cold and violent aura. She pointed the dagger in her hand at Yun Tian and said word by word, "If you dare touch a single hair on Silver Wind, I, Jingyu, will slaughter your entire poison sect to accompany it in death." Chapter 8:16. Yun Tian, try me if you dare. The black-robed woman was bursting with a powerful aura. Her murderous intent seemed to have triggered something incredible. The tyrannical aura emanating from her strange eyes was frightening. A thick, vicious aura swirled around Jingyu. Qin Bai's eyes widened as he turned to look at Jingyu. What a heavy killing intent. That murderous aura was so oppressive that it was hard to breathe. Qin Bai was so close that he could feel it deeply. He knew very well that Jingyu wasn't bluffing. If Yun Tian really dared to do this, then Qin Bai could almost foresee the poison sect's future. Qin Bai called out Jingyu's name in a low voice as he stood by Jingyu's side.
Scram!
Jingyu shouted fiercely. Her bloodthirsty eyes stared coldly and mercilessly at Qin Bai. At this moment, Jingyu was hard to recognize. What a heavy, murderous aura! Yun Tian stared at Jingyu in shock. His eyes grew solemn. In that moment, he felt a heavy sense of danger. The person who made him feel fear was actually this petite woman in front of him. Jingyu's body burned with an uncontrollable killing intent. At this moment, Jingyu couldn't control herself. She wanted to kill. She wanted to smell blood. There was only one word in her heart. Kill. Jingyu charged at Yun Tian's men like a ghost. Everything happened so quickly that she didn't even need to say a word. Jingyu's moves were incomparably vicious. Qin Bai's eyes narrowed. He reached out to grab Jingyu but failed. Jingyu didn't seem to know pain or dodge. She continued to attack recklessly. In the blink of an eye, a few more wounds appeared on her body. Qin Bai frowned and surrounded Jingyu. Bright red blood splashed in the rain, mixing with the water and dyeing the ground red. Jingyu! Qin Bai shouted. However, Jingyu acted as if she didn't hear him. Qin Bai approached Jingyu. Jingyu turned around and the dagger in her hand pierced towards Qin Bai. Qin Bai's expression turned cold. He bent his waist and dodged to the side. Raising his hand, he knocked the back of Jingyu's head. Air! Jingyu's hand that was holding the dagger softened. Her eyes slowly closed and she fell backwards. Qin Bai rushed over and carried Jingyu on his shoulder. The flexible sword in his hand drew out a sword flower, killing a bloody path. He quickly leaped into the dense forest. Yun Tian's darts flew towards Qin Bai. Qin Bai seemed to have expected this. He leaped into the forest and quickly bent down. He saw the darts fly past his body. They cut off a blade of grass, and the blade of grass that the darts touched withered. Qin Bai looked as if he had expected this. He jumped into the forest and quickly bent down. Qin Bai glanced at the withered blade of grass, and his expression turned cold. Despicable! Qin Bai cursed. Carrying Jingyu, he quickly escaped. After running for a long distance, he saw a waterfall. Under the waterfall was a deep pool. Behind them, Yun Tian's troops chased after them. Qin Bai's expression became heavy. He raised his hand and placed Jingyu down. Hugging Jingyu in his arms, he grabbed her head and without hesitation, plunged into the deep pool. The two of them fell into the depths of the pool. Qin Bai's hand that was hugging Jingyu did not loosen. The deep pool was bottomless. Qin Bai wanted to stick his head out, but unexpectedly, he saw a bright hole at the bottom of the pool. Chapter 8:17. Qin Bai hugged Jingyu tightly and dragged Jingyu towards the cave entrance. They could faintly hear the sound of something falling from the surface of the lake. Clearly, the people of Yun Tian had also jumped into the water and chased after them. Qin Bai waved his arms and swam through the cave entrance with all his might. After going through, his hand touched a protruding round rock and fiercely smashed it down. A huge rock fell down from the cave entrance and tightly blocked the entrance. The people of Yun Tian had chased them to this place and could not pass through. Someone seemed to want to use his martial arts to break the rock, but the rock did not move at all. Swords and knives could not move it at all. On the other side, the moment Qin Bai saw that the cave entrance was blocked, he dragged Jingyu towards the surface of the water. When he broke out of the water, he fiercely breathed in. This was a quiet cave. There was not a single trace of light in the cave. There was only a luminous pearl hanging from the ceiling that emitted a weak light. This place was like a tomb. Not far away, they could see a person who had already become a skeleton sitting on a stone chair. Cough, cough, cough. Qin Bai wiped the water from his face and used his martial arts to heal Jingyu. He raised his hand and patted Jingyu's back. Suddenly, The unconscious Jingyu fiercely coughed and spat out a lot of water. She slightly opened her hazy eyes. Awake? Qinbai half knelt on the ground and held Jingyu's head. Seeing Jingyu open her eyes, he finally let out a sigh of relief. Where is this? Jingyu propped herself up and raised her hand to touch the back of her head. She looked at Qinbai with incomparable bitterness and said, "You really hit me hard. I was afraid that if I used too much strength, I would not be able to knock you out." The corner of Qinbai's mouth hooked up into a trace of a smile. He stood up and said, "You said that there is a cave hidden under the waterfall. I also do not know where this place is. It seems like a tomb." Jingyu looked around and could feel a burst of yin qi. This made Jingyu's wet body tremble violently. She supported her weak body and stood up and said, "Let's see if there is an exit." "Okay," Qinbai responded. The two of them, one left and one right, looked around. There were stone walls everywhere. The only thing there was a white skeleton sitting on a stone chair. Jingyu and Qinbai circled around but found nothing. They stood in front of the white skeleton. The white skeleton had already decayed. Jingyu frowned slightly and seemed to see a dagger inserted in the skeleton. Jingyu was curious and wanted to touch it, but she was pulled back by Qinbai. He raised his hand and tore off a piece of cloth. He put it on the handle of the dagger and raised his hand to pull out the dagger. Qi. The moment the dagger was pulled out, the originally intact white skeleton suddenly turned into a pile of dust. What is this situation? Jingyu looked at the scene in front of her in shock. What are these words? Qinbai looked at the bone ash. He coldly looked away. He raised the dagger in his hand and squinted. He saw a bunch of weird symbols, but they were also very familiar. He frowned and said, "That's right. Let me see." Jingyu heard Qinbai's words and raised her eyebrows slightly. She moved closer and looked at the words on the dagger in Qinbai's hand. Kill? Jingyu looked at the word on the dagger and was stunned. What? Qinbai turned his head and looked at Jingyu in confusion. Kill. The word on the dagger means kill. Jingyu looked up at Qinbai and said. Chapter 8:18. What does a dagger inscribed with this character mean? Is it to kill this person? Qinbai slowly shook his head. He glanced at the dagger, then turned to Jingyu in confusion. How did you recognize this character? I read it in a scripture by accident. I thought it was interesting, so I memorized it. Jingyu replied swiftly. Her face didn't blush, and her heart didn't skip a beat. She spoke as if she were telling the truth. Qinbai arched his brows but didn't say anything. It wasn't clear whether he believed Jingyu or not. He brought the dagger to the pool they just emerged from, wanting to clean it. But the moment the dagger touched the water, it turned pitch black. A silver dagger? This pool is poisonous. Qinbai's expression changed. He looked up and saw that the blooming flowers on the stone wall had all withered. The pool was very calm, but it was filled with an aura of death. Yuntian is forcing us into a corner. Qinbai slowly rose to his feet, his eyes cold as he looked at the pool. Qinbai naturally knew that it was Yuntian's doing. The water had been fine just a moment ago. How could it have become like this in the blink of an eye? Who else but the poison sect could possess such a tyrannical poison? Yuntian has sealed off our only way out. What should we do now? Qinbai turned to Jingyu, but when he did, he saw the unconscious Jingyu on the ground. Qinbai's pupils shrank in fright as he strode toward Jingyu. Jingyu! Qinbai raised a hand to check Jingyu's weak breathing. As soon as he touched Jingyu's skin, he felt a scorching heat. Qinbai raised a hand to touch Jingyu's forehead. The scorching heat caused Qinbai to furrow his brows. He turned to look at the pool, his eyes cold. There was no food or water. Jingyu had a fever. The only source of light was the night illumination pearl. Jingyu! Jingyu, wake up! Qinbai patted Jingyu's cheeks. Frowning, he took off his clothes. They were still wet. Qinbai wrung out the last drop of water on them and dripped it into Jingyu's mouth. Time slowly passed. There was no night or day here, and Qinbai had no concept of time. Jingyu's head leaned against Qinbai's thigh. Her eyes were tightly shut. She didn't move. Calm hunger and cold attacked her. Jingyu's consciousness became more and more blurry due to her high fever. After sleeping for an unknown period of time, Jingyu finally opened her hazy eyes. The first thing she saw was the rock above her head. Then, she felt something pressing against her forehead. Jingyu turned her head and saw an arm. Extending upwards, she could see Qin Bai's handsome face. He was leaning against the rock with his eyes closed. His brows were slightly furrowed. Number 9. This scene was so familiar. It was the same cave, the same two of them, and the same dead end. It was so familiar that it was frightening. Their faces were exactly the same. Qin Bai frowned and slowly opened his eyes. When he lowered his head, he saw Jingyu staring straight at him. Qin Bai was slightly stunned. Then, he slowly removed his hand and said, "You're awake? Do you feel better?" "Why?" Jingyu stared at Qin Bai for a long time. Finally, she stared at Qin Bai and said, "Why did you enter the forest? Why did you save me? Who are you? Why did you approach me? Is it because of your different pupils?" Chapter 8:19. Jingyu stared intently at Qin Bai, as though she wanted Qin Bai to give her an explanation. "You are my fiancé," Qin Bai replied after a moment of silence. Then, he looked at Jingyu seriously. "Qin Bai." Jingyu suddenly stood up and placed the dagger in her hand against Qin Bai's neck. Jingyu's face was pale. She used all her strength to press against Qin Bai's neck. Her eyes shone with an unknown light as she stared intently at Qin Bai. "Tell me why." Jingyu gritted her teeth and looked at Qin Bai. Her eyes seemed to be filled with tears. "You are not him." "No." "Why? Why aren't you him?" "Jingyu." Qin Bai looked at Jingyu, who was suddenly so emotional. He frowned slightly and raised his hand to support Jingyu's shoulder. "Don't call my name." Jingyu threw the dagger in her hand. Because she threw it with too much force, it accidentally left a small scar on Qin Bai's neck. A drop of blood flowed out. Qin Bai stopped and looked at Jingyu quietly. "My name. You gave me my name. You gave it to me." Jingyu clutched her chest in pain. At this moment, the inner demon hidden in Jingyu's heart seemed to have exploded. She couldn't control it, and the countless memories invaded Jingyu's brain. Number 9. Number 9. Don't die. Jingyu closed her eyes tightly. "Don't be afraid." Qin Bai stepped forward and held Jingyu's shoulder. Looking at Jingyu's pale face, his calm heart suddenly trembled. Something different was quietly injected into it. "Don't die." "Die? Why did you die?" Jingyu fainted again. She fell into Qin Bai's arms as if she was sleep-talking. She frowned and couldn't stop mumbling. Qin Bai looked at Jingyu lying in his arms. His heart trembled again. This time, it trembled even more violently. "You won't die." Qin Bai's pitch-black eyes flashed with a different emotion. He hugged Jingyu a little tighter. His deep voice seemed to have a sense of calmness. Jingyu's tightly knitted brows relaxed a little. "Jingyu, I'll get you out of here." Qin Bai's gaze landed on Jingyu's hand. There was a ring mark on her middle finger. The 4 words on it made Qin Bai's expression change slightly. Qin Bai turned his head and stared at Jingyu's face. There was an abnormal flush on her pale face. Qin Bai's gaze changed slightly. He raised his hand slightly and gently touched Jingyu's cheek. A scorching heat came through, startling Qin Bai so much that he retracted his hand slightly. His hand paused in midair. Then, he continued to reach forward and touch Jingyu's cheek. Perhaps even Qin Bai himself didn't realize how careful his actions were. His pitch-black eyes stared at Jingyu for a long time. Finally, the corners of his mouth curved into a faint smile. "Fiancé." Qin Bai squinted. He looked at Jingyu as he said those 3 words. There was a distant tone to his voice. It was like he was murmuring out of curiosity, but it also sounded like he was very happy. There was a determination in his voice that was hard to detect. When Qin Bai called her fiancé, it was not as casual as it had been before. It did not seem to matter. This time, it sounded more like an oath. "Jingyu." Qin Bai's thumb gently rubbed Jingyu's cheek. After a long while, he slowly withdrew his hand. He hugged Jingyu and leaned against the stone wall. He looked at the top of the stone wall and narrowed his eyes. There was a deep look in his eyes. Chapter 820. A strong smell of blood came from her mouth. Jingyu licked the corner of her mouth. It was blood. Jingyu slowly turned her head and raised her hand to touch the corner of her mouth. Her fingers were stained with blood. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she turned her head to look. The hand that was hanging on the ground was wrapped in a strip of cloth. There were even faint traces of blood seeping out of it. And the owner of this hand, Qinbai. Qinbai. Jingyu suddenly sat up and saw the unconscious man leaning against the stone wall. His pale face and cracked lips shocked Jingyu. "You're awake." Qinbai slowly opened his pitch-black eyes and looked at Jingyu, whose complexion had returned to normal. His lips curled into a faint smile. He raised his hand to touch Jingyu's forehead. It was no longer burning, but a normal temperature. Your fever has subsided." Qinbai propped himself up and tried to stand up. However, he suddenly felt dizzy. Jingyu quickly walked forward and supported Qinbai. Her eyes darkened. "Why?" Jingyu stared at Qinbai. She lowered her head, and her gaze fell on Qinbai's wrist. A deep look flashed across her eyes. She raised her hand and grabbed Qinbai's wrist. She pulled the cloth away and saw his wrist, which was riddled with cuts. "Qinbai, how much blood did you feed me?" Jingyu felt a sharp pain in her heart. Scenes from the past flashed through her mind. It was so shockingly familiar. "You finally called my name correctly for once." Qinbai looked into Jingyu's eyes and slowly retracted his hand. He silently wrapped the cloth around his wrist and said, "We don't have time. There must be an exit here. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to breathe and survive for so long." Jingyu watched as Qinbai turned around and walked around the cave. His tall figure and dirty clothes couldn't hide his elegance. That familiar face. He was doing the same thing to her. Everything was so familiar. Why? Why was it like this? "Qinbai, who are you?" Jingyu stared at Qinbai's back and asked in a deep voice. "I'm your fiancé." Qinbai froze when he heard this. He turned around and fixed his pitch-black eyes on Jingyu. "Qinbai, you." Jingyu was about to say something when she suddenly heard a muffled sound coming from inside the cave. This sound seemed to be caused by a huge knocking sound. This sound was coming from outside. Someone was knocking on the stone wall. "Over here." Qinbai obviously heard it too. His eyes lit up. After listening carefully for a few seconds, he quickly walked in a certain direction. Qinbai and Jingyu were standing in the innermost part of the cave. The muffled sounds were even clearer now. Pang! Many heavy hits sounded. It made Jingyu and Qinbai clench their fists. "Back off." Qinbai raised his hand and shielded Jingyu behind him. His pitch-black eyes stared at the stone wall as if he wanted to circulate his energy to break it open. Jingyu looked at Qinbai's hand protecting her, and her heart trembled violently. She looked at Qinbai's back and frowned slightly. "Your hand." Jingyu looked at Qinbai's injured hand and wanted to grab Qinbai. However, Qinbai brushed her hand aside and said indifferently, "It's nothing. It's just a small injury." Jingyu stood in the distance and watched as Qinbai fiercely punched the stone wall. His fist seemed to be covered with a layer of glass. A deafening sound was heard and Jingyu's eardrums hurt. Chapter 821. Cough cough. Qinbai coughed slightly and waved away the choking dust. This stone wall was indeed extraordinarily hard. Even after such an impact, there was only a bowl-sized hole. Qinbai's face turned slightly cold as he stared at the stone wall with a solemn expression. Just as Qinbai stopped moving, there seemed to be a brief moment of stagnation outside the cave. Then, there was a frantic crashing sound. The crashing sound came one after another. Qinbai did not stay idle. He waved his fist and struck again. Jingyu covered her ears tightly. The loud crashing sound reverberated in the cave, causing people's hearts to tremble. Boom! After countless swings of his arm, the hard stone wall was finally thinned. Vaguely, they could hear voices coming from outside. "Master, don't hit anymore." The voice was so soft and so familiar that it caused Jingyu's brain to short-circuit for a moment. Qinbai used all his strength to swing his arm for the last time. The stone wall produced a loud crashing sound and collapsed, causing dust to roll down. Jingyu stared fixedly at the slowly dispersing dust and listened to the sound of footsteps. Finally, the moment the dust dispersed, she saw the figure standing on the pile of stones. He was dressed in black and was covered in dust. His hands were covered in blood and injuries. Xiaochun. At this moment, there was no one else in Jingyu's eyes. She only saw him. Xiaochun's face and body were covered in dust. The cuffs of his clothes were torn. She could see that his arms were covered in dust and dripping with blood. There was not a single piece of skin on his arms that was intact. His face was filled with brutality, and his pitch-black eyes were bloodshot. The thick aura of death in his eyes made Jingyu's heart palpitate. Xiaochun raised his head to look at Jingyu. The living Jingyu standing in front of him and that familiar voice calling out to him made Xiaochun almost stumble over. Using his scarred hands, he hugged Jingyu with all his strength. You are. Xiaochun hugged her so tightly that he almost broke Jingyu's bones. His trembling body and his cries of joy and sorrow made Jingyu's heart ache. She hugged Xiaochun's waist back and buried her head in his chest. Suddenly, tears filled her eyes. Xiaochun. Jingyu choked out Xiaochun's name in a clear voice. I thought I'd lost you. Xiaochun hugged Jingyu tightly for a long time, then said deeply, Jingyu. Xiaochun greedily sniffed Jingyu's scent. After so many years of tormenting emotions, when he heard that Jingyu might have been killed by the poison sect, Xiaochun almost couldn't control his anger. It felt like a sharp knife had viciously gouged out a piece of flesh from his heart. The pain was so intense that he almost suffocated. How could this be? How could his Jingyu have died? He'd searched day and night for her, chopping down every tree in the forest and draining every drop of water from the pond. In just a few short days, Xiaochun had spent every moment in torment. Every moment he missed her, every moment he blamed himself. Until now, when he saw Jingyu appear in front of him alive and well. The joy of regaining what he'd lost hit his brain and his heart. He hugged Jingyu tightly. He didn't want to let go of her anymore. Never again. Chapter 822. Qinbai stood at the side, his pitch-black eyes silently watching the two figures hugging each other as if there was no one else around. His gaze fell on Jingyu's face. He saw Jingyu's relieved expression, her dependent expression, and the way she took the initiative to hug Xiaochun. In that instant, Qinbai suddenly clenched his fists. He actually had the urge to step forward and separate the two of them. A sour feeling brewed in his heart. Although it was a very slight feeling, it was enough to make Qinbai panic. Why would he have such thoughts? Xiaochun was Jingyu's husband. Their actions should be normal, but why would he be unhappy? Why would he have such a strange feeling? It was a strange feeling, and it made Qinbai feel uneasy. He clenched his fists tightly, and when he felt a piercing pain in his palms, he suddenly sobered up. He calmly lowered his eyes and suppressed the strange feeling in his heart. He coldly raised his eyes and stared at Jingyu and Xiaochun, who had let go of each other. Tell me, where are you hurt? Where does it hurt? Where does it hurt? Xiaochun's hands trembled slightly as he gripped Jingyu's shoulders tightly. When he saw the bloodstains on Jingyu's body, his eyes were filled with panic. His hands that were gripping Jingyu's shoulders trembled violently, as if he wanted to hug her tightly but was afraid of using too much force. Jingyu looked at Xiaochun's appearance, and her heart suddenly ached. The ninth emperors, who did not bat an eyelid in the face of death, but in front of her, he was as flustered as a child. He was so careful and panicked. It hurts. It hurts everywhere. Xiaochun, I'm so hungry. Jingyu looked at Xiaochun with eyes full of grievances. Her words made Xiaochun even more flustered. He was so flustered that he did not know what to do. He frantically said, Where does it hurt? I'm hungry. I'll take you home. Let's go eat. You can eat whatever you want. I can't walk anymore. I want a hug. Jingyu blinked her eyes and looked at Xiaochun pitifully. She raised her arms and hugged Xiaochun, hanging onto Xiaochun's body. Without another word, Xiao Chun picked Jingyu up and said, "Okay, I'll carry you." "Master, madam." Xing Er, who was standing outside the cave, walked up to her. Jingyu looked at Xing Er. Indeed, the voice she had just heard belonged to Xing Er. "Master, your hand." Xing Er frowned as he looked at Xiao Qin's scarred hand and said worriedly,
"It's fine."
Xiao Qin replied without any change in his expression. He lowered his eyes and looked at Jingyu in his arms. The gentleness in his eyes was almost overflowing. If it could make her feel less pain, he was willing to give up his hands, let alone these superficial wounds. That person. Finally, someone's gaze landed on Qin Bai. Qin Bai also took steady steps and walked out from the stone wall. He stood in front of Xiao Chun and Jingyu and looked at them with a slight smile. Finally, his gaze landed on Xiao Chun. When their eyes met, an invisible pressure filled the air. "Ninth Emperors, our first meeting is really interesting." Qin Bai looked at Xiao Chun indifferently and lowered his head slightly. He instantly retracted his aura and looked at Qin Bai like an ordinary man, calm and gentle. "You, who are you?" When he saw Qin Bai and their eyes met, Xiao Qin's heart felt a sense of danger that he had never felt before. That sense of danger was very strong. He looked deeply at Jingyu before turning his head to look at Xiao Qian. Finally, the corners of his mouth curled up slightly as he said, "In life and death, how can we rely on each other if we don't have the heart to rely on each other?" Qin Bai left these words indifferently. He turned and walked towards the side of the forest. His calm voice sounded as he said, "I am not indebted to you. Everything I do is of my own volition. I only hope that when we meet again in the future, you won't forget about me." Qin Bai walked away leisurely. Jingyu stood in the same spot and looked at Qin Bai's departing figure. She suddenly had a strange feeling. She felt that Qin Bai's words contained a hidden meaning. Jingyu frowned uncomfortably. Chapter 824. I owe you a debt of gratitude, but you don't. This is my debt of gratitude, not yours. Jingyu slowly lowered her hand and smiled faintly. Only she knew what she was thinking when she said those words. Only she knew what she wanted to express when she said those words. Xiao Chun stood silently beside Jingyu and stared at Jingyu. Jingyu looked up at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun. Jingyu looked back at Xiao Chun. Xiao Chun looked deeply at Jingyu and looked at her hand. Xiao Chun clearly felt that Jingyu really wanted to cut off one of his fingers because of this so-called mark. "Aren't you hungry?" Xiao Chun raised his hand and touched Jingyu's cheek. "Hungry. Very hungry. I'm going to faint from hunger." Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun with a bitter expression. "You know you're hungry, yet you still talk so much. Aren't you tired?" Xiao Chun held Jingyu's hand and said, "Let's go and eat something delicious." "Okay." Jingyu happily leaned on Xiao Chun, her eyes filled with joy. She leaned on Xiao Chun and walked out of the forest. Along the way, Jingyu noticed the place they came out of. "This place. It seems like, Xiao Chun, how did you dig this place?" Jingyu's face darkened as she looked at the forest that had been completely dug up. They walked out of the ground because the pit was very big and not deep. It was like walking uphill. Within a radius of 10 miles, the originally dense forest had almost all been cut down, leaving only a few sparse trees. It had to be said that the scene in front of them was quite shocking. "I'm just guessing," Xiao Chun calmly replied. Jingyu looked around and saw that the entire forest had been dug into. "Holy shit, this is too awesome. Don't tell me you called everyone from the Nether Hall here to dig?" Jingyu looked at Xiao Chun strangely and asked.
"Yes."
Xiao Chun calmly replied again. Jingyu's eyes widened as if she had seen a ghost. She looked at Xiao Chun strangely and asked, "Could it be that they all dug with their hands?" It's faster this way." Xiao Chun looked at Jingyu and said with a smile that seemed to say, "You're really smart." Jingyu staggered. At this moment, she was filled with admiration for Xiao Chun. Inwardly, she mourned for the legendary Nether Sect elites. The great Nether Sect elites were called here to dig. Not only were they not allowed to use tools, but they had to use their hands to dig. This was terrifying. At this moment, the Nether sect members thought, it's not easy to be an underling, but it's even more difficult to be a subordinate. The sect master had used the Nether token. The Nether sect members had to obey unless they were dead. They had only seen the Nether token twice in their lives. The first time was when the old sect master used the Nether token to avenge his daughter. It was said that the heavens and the earth were shaken at that time. Blood flowed like a river. Since then, it was said that when the Nether token was used, piles of bones would be formed. However, this time, the Nether token was used to cut down trees and dig for the sect master's wife. What happened to the heavens and the earth? What happened to the rivers of blood that flowed like a river? What happened to the piles of bones that flowed like a river? They did see blood. Look at this pair of hands that were used to dig the ground. Blood flowed like a river. If they talked too much, they would cry. The people behind Xiao Chun and Jingyu were disheartened. Xing Er's lips twitched. Only his master would do something like this. Naturally, his master would only do something like this when it came to Jingyu. Chapter 825. It's been so long. Why haven't you asked about Shangguan Linglan's whereabouts? Xiao Chun raised his eyebrows and looked at Jingyu in confusion. According to Jingyu's temperament, she should have asked as soon as they left the cave. Do I even need to ask? Jingyu rolled her eyes and said, Look at how calm our Xing Er is following you. Linglan must have been rescued by you guys. She's fine now. Xiao Chun turned to look at Xing Er and asked in confusion, What does Shangguan Linglan's expression have to do with Xing Er's expression? Ha ha ha, you don't understand. Jingyu winked at Xing Er and said, Xing Er, am I right? Xing Er's face suddenly blushed and he called out in embarrassment, Madam. Ayaya, don't be embarrassed. Tell me about that dagger. Jingyu saw that the cold Xing Er was blushing and became excited. She winked at Xing Er and said, Jingyu's face turned even redder. Madam, aren't you hungry? I remember that there's a roasted chicken restaurant in Balwan that's pretty good. Xing Er took a deep breath and said calmly, Roasted chicken. Ah, Xiao Chun, I'm so hungry. I want to eat roasted chicken. Jingyu was instantly excited. She hugged Xiao Chin's arm and said resentfully, Why aren't we there yet? Why are we so far? I'm so hungry. Xing Er followed behind Jingyu and Xiao Chun and silently wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. He had dodged a bullet. It was too dangerous to follow behind Madam. Second Xing turned around and followed behind Xiao Chen with his head down. He slowed down a little and just hung at a distance, not daring to get any closer. Baylor City was bustling with people. In the restaurant, this was already Jingyu's second roast chicken. There was a large table full of bones and leftovers. On the opposite side of the table, Xiao Chun, Shangguan Linglan, and Xing San were expressionlessly watching Jingyu's bold and unrestrained eating. TSK, TSK, TSK. I always thought that I was rude enough, but today... Shanghai Linglan silently stared at Jingyu and said, I've lost at your feet, a crushing defeat. Burp. Jingyu comfortably burped and drank the soup in the bowl. She picked up a handkerchief and slowly wiped her mouth. Then, she finally had time to look at Xiao Chun and the others. Are you full? Xiao Chun slightly raised his eyebrows and asked Jingyu. I'm full. Jingyu nodded seriously. You have a good appetite, Xiao Chun silently said and raised his hand to call the waiter to clean up the table. You call this a good appetite? Shanghai Linglan almost jumped up. He stared at Jingyu and Xiao Chun in shock and said, Yeah. You've eaten all the food you've been starving for the past 5 to 6 days. Linglan, you also know that I've been starving for the past 5 to 6 days? Jingyu looked at Shanghai Linglan with an aggrieved expression and cried, You don't know what kind of life I've been living in there. I have no food, no water, no sun, and no moon. I can't even take a bath. I've suffered. Stop, stop, stop. Shanghai Linglan repeatedly called for her to stop. Oh. Jingyu immediately stopped crying. The speed at which she changed her expression shocked Shanghai Linglan so much that his eyes widened. Shanghai Linglan held back for a long time and stared at Jingyu with a strange expression as he asked, You? You used to be an opera singer, right? Chapter 826. Tui. Nonsense. Jingyu glared at Shangguan Linglan. I was clearly acting. Shangguan Linglan and Xiao Qin's faces instantly darkened. Was there a difference between the two? Enough with the nonsense. Linglan, how are your injuries? Where's Jian? Jingyu sat up straight and looked up at Shangguan Linglan. Without waiting for Shangguan Linglan's reply, she turned to Xiao Qian and asked, When did you get here? How did you find out about me? My injuries are fine now. Shangguan Linglan was the first to speak. Jian and Feng are also fine. We've arranged for them to stay in a room in the inn's backyard. As for how we found out about you, it was Feng who led us into the forest to search for you. Feng really did go looking for Jian. Jingyu slowly let out a sigh of relief. Yun Tian's bravado that day was indeed just to scare her. No wonder she didn't see him bring Feng out. However, this person already had such thoughts, and it was already unforgivable. Yes, when Feng came alone, I knew something had happened to you. But because I was injured, I didn't dare move a muscle when I was trapped in the forest. The poison sex people had practically surrounded the entire area. If it wasn't for Xing Er coming to save me, I'm afraid I would have been waiting for death. Shangguan Linglan looked gratefully at Xing Er as he spoke. It's what I should do. Xing Er happened to be looking at Shangguan Linglan. When he saw Shangguan Linglan's gaze, his heart skipped a beat. His grip on his sword tightened as he turned his head away and replied coldly, I'm not thanking you. When Shangguan Linglan saw Xing Er's cold expression, her face darkened and she retorted fiercely. She didn't know why, but when she saw Xing Er's expression, Shangguan Linglan felt especially unhappy. Xing Er's face darkened and he didn't say anything. Xiao Chun, logically speaking, you should have arrived at Baylor long ago. Why did you delay so much? Jingyu nodded slightly after hearing Shangguan Linglan's words. She then turned to look at Xiao Chun and asked curiously, I would like to apologize to you for this. When Xiao Chun heard Jingyu's question, his face slowly darkened. He said coldly, I met Nailin Yu on the way to Baylor. She lied to me about the wet nurse's life, so I had no choice but to return to the royal city to investigate. You returned to the royal city? Jingyu's eyes widened slightly. She looked at Xiao Chun and asked, What happened to the wet nurse? I didn't find the wet nurse, but... Xiao Chun pursed his lips and said, I know that the wet nurse is safe. She was hidden by someone. When we were young, I made an agreement with the wet nurse that if she was safe, she would bury this under the roots of the banyan tree. I found this. Xiao Chen's hand was a plum blossom carved from wood. The carving was very delicate, and the word safe was engraved on it. It's good that she's safe. Jingyu let out a sigh of relief, but then Jingyu frowned again. She looked at Xiao Chen and said, How did you meet Nailin Yu on the road? I don't know. Xiao Chen slowly shook his head. He looked at Jingyu and said, Nailin Yu seemed to have come specifically to tell me this news. Then, she followed me all the way to the royal city. When I wanted to deal with her, she disappeared. This woman's brain has problems. Jingyu's lips twitched. She was very conflicted. Chapter 827. Actually, after hearing Xiao Chen's words and combining them with what Yun Tian had told her last time, Jingyu had a rough idea of what was going on. Could it be that they were going to follow her and spread some inexplicable news to ruin her relationship with Xiao Chen? As expected, there was something wrong with their heads. Jingyu frowned slightly as she looked at Xiao Chen and continued to ask, So you came to Baylor only after going to the Imperial City? Xiao Chen nodded. The poison sect actually set up an ambush here. I think all of this was premeditated. Xiao Qin's expression was grave. Jing Yu's lips curled slightly, clearly knowing what Xiao Qin meant. She arched her brows and said, "How did the poison sect find out that I was here? It looks like there are some interesting things among our people." What do you plan to do next?" Xiao Qin leaned back slightly and narrowed his eyes at Jing Yu. "I disappeared for 5 or 6 days. What about General Shangguan and Miaoqiu? Could they have already entered Luan City?" Jing Yu frowned deeply as she looked at Xiao Qian and Shangguan Linglan. Xiao Qin's expression darkened slightly. "When I arrived at Baylor, General Shangguan's family and the Crown Prince Consort were being escorted into Luan City. Although I was powerless to save him, don't worry. I sent shadow guards to follow General Shangguan. They won't let his life be in danger." "Damn it." Jing Yu's expression turned ugly as she clenched her fists tightly. If the poison sect hadn't come out to cause trouble, she would have saved General Shangguan and the Crown Prince Consort long ago. "Where are the poison sect's people?" Jing Yu looked up at Xiao Qin. "They left." Xiao Qin narrowed his eyes. "I didn't see the poison sect's leader, but some of my subordinates killed quite a few of them. After asking around, I found out that the poison sect's leader had already left before I arrived." "How cunning." Jing Yu's heart was filled with indignation. She narrowed her eyes and leaned back as she said, "I don't have time to settle accounts with the poison sect right now. I'll remember this debt. The most important thing right now is to rescue Great General Shangguan and Miaoqiu. Your body hasn't recovered yet. You shouldn't move around recklessly. Rest for a few days. It's not that easy to enter Luan City." Xiao Qin looked up at Jing Yu and said, Jing Yu wanted to say that she was fine, but when she saw the deep look in Xiao Qin's eyes, she silently swallowed her words. She muttered, "I know. Once I've recovered, I'll set off." When Xiao Qin heard Jing Yu's words, he raised his eyebrows in satisfaction. His lips curled into a faint smile. After a brief conversation, Jing Yu returned to her room. She took a comfortable bath and lay down on the soft bed. "AI, so comfortable." Jing Yu stroked the brocade quilt and sighed deeply. Xiao Qin strode over. When he saw Jing Yu lying on the bed, his brows relaxed slightly. He walked over to Jing Yu and sat on the edge of the bed. He raised a hand to stroke Jing Yu's hair. Jing Yu turned to look at Xiao Qin. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she rubbed against Xiao Qin. "Xiao Qin, I almost thought I'd never see you again." Jing Yu closed her eyes as she rubbed against Xiao Qin's hand. The familiar warmth of his slightly rough palm warmed Jing Yu's heart. She seemed to sigh contentedly in her heart. Xiao Qin raised a hand to stroke Jing Yu's head. His eyes darkened as he asked, "That Qin Bai, who is he?" Chapter 828. When Jing Yu heard Xiao Qin's question, she lifted her head in confusion. She stared at Xiao Qin's gloomy expression and coughed softly. Then, she sat up in a serious manner and said, "This is what happened. I accidentally saved him from the poison sect. After that, Linglan and I were surrounded by the poison sect, and I accidentally got poisoned. As I was running away, Qinbai saved me. In the end, he bandaged my wounds and said something about taking responsibility for me." Then, as Jing Yu spoke, she raised her hand with hidden bitterness and said to Xiao Qin, "Look, it's this thing." Without another word, Qinbai put a ring on me. I swear, I threw the ring away, but there's actually a witchcraft spell on it. The mark on your finger was left by that damned ring. The scariest thing is, the witchcraft spell on the ring is life and death interdependence. You see that, right? It means that if Qinbai dies, I die too. If I die, Qinbai dies too. Life and death are intertwined. Jing Yu looked at Xiao Qin with tears in her eyes and said, "Xiao Qin, what do we do? Life and death interdependence. A witchcraft spell." Xiao Qin gently lifted Jing Yu's hand and looked at the ring mark on Jing Yu's finger. His expression turned cold and a faint trace of viciousness flashed through his pitch-black eyes. "How dare you lay your hands on my woman? You must be tired of living. Xiao Chun coldly spat out. His words were filled with thick, killing intent. Xiao Chun. Jingyu could feel Xiao Chun's murderous intent and tightly grasped his hand. Her eyes were pleading as she bit her lip and said, Xiao Chun, I owe him a debt of gratitude. Don't touch him. Jingyu. Xiao Chun's expression abruptly changed, and he suddenly tightened his grip on Jingyu's hand. His grip on Jingyu's hand was so tight that it was as if he was about to break her hand. Ouch, ouch, ouch. Jingyu grimaced in pain as she shook off Xiao Chun's hand. She glared at Xiao Chun and said angrily, Xiao Chun, he saved my life. If it wasn't for Qinbai, I would have died long ago. How can you be so selfish? Xiao Chun felt a sharp pain in his heart as he looked at Jingyu, who was angry at him because of another man. The corners of his lips curled up coldly. In the room, the two of them stared at each other for a long time. In the end, Xiao Chun slowly relaxed his clenched fists. He stood up abruptly and turned to leave without a word. Jingyu sat on the bed and listened to the sound of the door closing. Her heart suddenly skipped a beat. Just now, what was wrong with her? Why was she angry at Xiao Chun because of Qinbai? Jingyu clutched her chest in a panic. She didn't know why, but at that moment, Jingyu suddenly felt a little flustered. She felt as if something was going wrong, and it was developing in a way that she couldn't have predicted. She was now in a panic. Jingyu's gaze fell on her middle finger. The ring-like mark was quietly imprinted on her finger. It was like a sign or a curse that made Jingyu feel even more uncomfortable. Jingyu stared at the mark for a long time. Suddenly, Qinbai's figure appeared in her mind. That familiar face, that calm voice, was exactly the same as his. Jingyu's heart surged as she recalled the scene in the cave. Her wrist had been cut, and the fresh blood that had flowed out of her mouth. She hadn't done anything wrong. She hadn't allowed Xiao Chun to touch Qinbai because she wanted him to repay his kindness. Chapter 829. As Jingyu thought of this, she gathered her thoughts and lowered her eyes before lying down. She laid on the bed and stared at the ceiling before slowly closing her eyes. Jingyu was probably really tired as she fell asleep after a short while. Jingyu was completely silent in her dreams. Outside the door, on the roof, Xiao Chun sat on the roof with a wine jar in each hand. He stared at the dark night sky and the bright moon as he drank silently.
Master.
Xing'er was dressed in black and quietly leaped onto the roof. He looked at Xiao Chun, who was drinking alone, and frowned slightly. Xiao Chun turned to look at Xing'er but didn't say anything. Xing'er also stood silently behind Xiao Chun and silently watched as Xiao Chun drank mouthful after mouthful of wine. Master, drinking too much wine is bad for the body. Xing'er finally stepped forward to stop Xiao Chun's hand. Xiao Chun paused slightly and looked up at Xing'er. His eyes were cold, and he didn't look drunk at all. He just looked at Xing'er coldly. Let go. The cold words were spat out. Xing'er felt his scalp go numb, but he still held on tightly to Xiao Chun and didn't let go. Master, perhaps Madam didn't react in time, and that's why she's angry with you. Xing'er looked like he was going to die. He gritted his teeth and said, also, that man called Qinbai has an unknown background. It's possible that he has deceived Madam. Xing'er's words finally had an effect. Xiao Chun successfully frowned and slowly put down the wine jar in his hand. Xing'er silently heaved a sigh of relief and retracted his hand. He quietly said, Master, it's useless to drown your sorrows in wine. The most important thing now is to investigate Qinbai's background and his motive for getting close to Madam. Xiao Chun coldly narrowed his eyes and looked at the distant sky. He said, Go investigate. Yes. Xing'er bowed and replied. He looked at the wine jar at Xiao Chun's feet and quietly said, Master, this wine. How about this subordinate help you take it down? Xiao Chun's face darkened. He glared at Xing'er and coldly replied. Xing'er hurriedly went forward to take the wine jars and flew down. Master didn't need to drink anymore. Drinking was a bad thing. Xing Er jumped down from the roof and raised his hand to place the wine jar on the stone table. Just as he was about to let go, he heard footsteps from the side. Xing Er frowned and turned to look. He immediately saw Shangguan Linglan standing on the stone steps and under the corridor. Shangguan Linglan was wearing a thin inner garment with a long robe casually draped over her body. Her black hair was draped over her shoulders. Her face was calm and her eyes were tranquil. She just stood in the corridor like this. Looking at her, Second Xing's heart skipped a beat. At this moment, Shangguan Linglan was different from how she was in the day. There was a faint worry between her brows and a calm emotion in her eyes. Xing Er was not used to it for a moment. You. Xing Er pursed his lips and frowned at Shangguan Linglan. He didn't know what she was doing out here in the middle of the night. Are you drinking? Shangguan Linglan glanced at Xing Er, and his gaze landed on the wine jar on the stone table. He raised his eyes slightly and asked Xing Er in confusion. This? Xing Er looked at the wine jar in his hand. He seemed to want to explain but didn't know how to. Before Xing Er could think of a way to explain, Shangguan Linglan had already walked over. She raised her hand and grabbed the wine jar in Xing Er's hand. Good. I want a drink too. Chapter 830. It's not good for a girl to drink, Xing Er said as he frowned and glared at Shangguan Linglan, not letting go of the wine jar in his hand. What's not good about it? I'm happy to do it. Give it to me. Shangguan Linglan snatched the jar of wine from Second Xing's hand without saying a word. She raised her hand and was about to put it into her mouth when Second Xing's face turned cold. His hand turned into a palm and pushed the jar of wine to the ground. Pa! A jar of wine spilled on the ground. Shangguan Linglan's eyes widened as he stared at the broken wine jar and the wine spilling all over the floor. The sound of the wine spilling out made Shangguan Linglan gnash his teeth in anger. Are you out of your mind? What does my drinking have to do with you? If you want to snatch it, then snatch it. You even dropped the wine. Shangguan Linglan's eyes widened as she angrily glared at Second Xing. Second interrogation officer glanced at the shattered wine jars on the ground and said, It was an accident. You. I. Shangguan Linglan sat on the stone chair angrily. Xing Er stepped forward and placed his hand on Shangguan Linglan's shoulder. He frowned and said, Do you miss your family? Shangguan Linglan trembled and looked up at Xing Er, who was standing beside him. He was dressed in black and his face was as cold as ever. It's none of your business. Shangguan Linglan shook off Xing Er's hand on his shoulder and got up to leave. Stop right there. Xing Er grabbed Shangguan Linglan's hand and frowned. Shangguan Linglan turned to look at Xing Er and said unhappily, Are you ordering me? Xing Er, do you know how annoying you are? Shangguan Linglan shook off Xing Er's hand and turned to leave without hesitation. Xing Er's eyes widened. The hand that was shaken off still had her heat, but it made Xing Er feel like it was piercing and burning. Annoying? Xing Er lowered his head slightly and clenched his fists. He turned around and disappeared into the darkness. His black clothes blended into the night and he disappeared. Shangguan Linglan angrily returned to the room, fell on the bed and scolded fiercely. Isn't he just a little guard? How dare he order me around? You didn't let me drink. Annoying. Who do you think you are? What right do you have to control me? Annoying. After Shangguan Linglan rolled on the bed, he took a deep breath and stared at the bed. He calmed down. Xing Er. Father, mother, wait for me to come and save you. Jingyu recuperated peacefully. For the past 3 days, Jingyu rarely saw Xiao Chun. Occasionally, she would see Xiao Chun talking to Xing Er. Then, the two of them would talk and leave. She didn't know what they were busy with. Stupid Xiao Chun. Idiot. Idiot. Jingyu drank the medicine in one gulp. She sat by the window and looked at the bustling street below. Looking at the empty room, she felt very uncomfortable. She cursed and cursed. Her heart was full of resentment. It had been 3 days. Xiao Chun didn't say a word to her. He didn't even look at her. He just turned and left when he saw her. Jingyu was so angry that she almost went berserk. Little Ye? Shangguan Linglan poked his head into the room. He looked around and saw Jingyu sitting by the window. He straightened his body and walked towards Jingyu. Jingyu looked at Shangguan Linglan and sighed. Oh, what's wrong? Are you still angry with the 9 emperors? Shangguan Linglan raised his eyebrows and looked at Jingyu with amusement. Chapter 831. Jingyu sighed bitterly and said, Xiao Chun has already ignored me for 3 days. Shangguan Linglan silently swallowed and said, It's probably because the 9th emperors are too busy. You didn't see how he brought Xing'er up and down these past few days. He's so busy that I can't even see his shadow. Don't worry. Sigh. Jingyu sighed deeply and said, My injuries are fine now. Linglan, let's go to Luan City tomorrow. Okay. Shangguan Linglan took a deep breath and nodded. Luan City is too chaotic. We definitely can't go in like this. We have to go buy some things and disguise ourselves. We have to buy things. As for the disguise, Jingyu straightened her body and said, Luan City is ruled by the strong. It's just a matter of killing. The people who go in will kill everyone. What's there to be afraid of? Isn't this a little too arrogant? Shangguan Linglan's mouth twitched when she heard this and asked, Linglan, you'll know what true arrogance is once you enter Luan City. Jingyu curled her lips and stood up to stretch. She said, Let's go. We'll go buy things. Did you bring money? It seems like there's only a little money left. Shangguan Linglan said as he untied the money pouch on his waist. That's enough. Let's go. Jingyu raised her hand and took it. She silently weighed it and smiled. Without saying anything, she pulled Shangguan Linglan and walked towards Baylor Street. Standing on the crowded street, Jingyu took a deep breath. This feels great. Jingyu sighed deeply and pulled Shangguan Linglan's hand. She said excitedly, Let's go. Let's go play. Hey. Didn't you say you were going shopping? Shangguan Linglan's eyes widened. He looked at Jingyu in horror and said, Save your money. That's all I have left. What are you afraid of? If you don't have money, you can ask Xing'er for it. Jingyu completely ignored Shangguan Linglan. Her eyes were filled with curiosity as she looked at the items on the street stalls. There were even bamboo woven ponies and rabbits. It was simply magical. What? Why did you ask Xing'er for it? Shangguan Linglan stood beside Jingyu in a daze and asked, I don't think he owes me any money. This? Jingyu coughed slightly and turned to look at Shangguan Linglan. Do you believe me? If you ask Xing'er for money, I guarantee that Xing'er will give it to you without a second thought. Why? Shangguan Linglan blinked her eyes and looked at Jingyu with a confused expression as she asked, This is a secret that cannot be revealed. Jingyu pursed her lips and replied. She heard a commotion. Jingyu turned her head in confusion and pulled Shangguan Linglan, who was still in a daze. What's so fun over there? Hurry, let's go take a look. Yeah. We're here to buy things. Before Shangguan Linglan could finish speaking, Jingyu reached out and pulled him towards the crowd. Jingyu pulled Shangguan Linglan and crept into the crowd to see what was going on. It was a juggler. Chapter 832. Fellow villagers and elders, today I will show everyone how to tease a snake. There were quite a few people standing and sitting in the circle. Some had monkeys on their shoulders, some had rabbits in their hands, and there was even a tiger in the cage. Jingyu had just stood still when she heard the man speak. When everyone heard him teasing a snake, they all waved their hands disinterestedly. What was there to see about teasing a snake? Everyone, Don't be anxious. Don't be anxious. The burly man quickly said, as everyone knows, everyone has seen this snake before, right? However, there is a type of snake. I guarantee that no one has ever seen it before. You have to know that this is the number one poisonous snake in the world. Hiss. When everyone heard this, their eyes instantly widened. They looked at the person who spoke with astonishment. Was this person going to tease a poisonous snake? Big brother, when you say tease a snake, are you going to tease the white-browed viper? Someone in the crowd asked with fear and doubt. Ha ha ha. The white-browed viper is at most a tyrant of the plains. However, the snake I'm going to tease today is the number one poisonous snake in the world. As the man spoke, he raised his hand slightly and called out, "Bring that cage up." Coming. A young man carried a metal cage covered with a black cloth and placed it in front of everyone. The surrounding spectators all began to whisper. Jingyu, who was standing in the crowd, also frowned. Shangguan Linglan curiously stretched his neck and looked at the cage covered with a black cloth with a puzzled expression. Everyone, please take a closer look at what snake this is. The man raised his hand and pulled the black cloth away. A jet-black snake lay quietly in the metal cage, its body coiled up and motionless. Everyone looked at the snake that was as black as ink and began to whisper to each other, guessing what kind of snake it was. Ha ha ha. Everyone, watch carefully. As the man spoke, he raised his leg and kicked the metal cage. The coiled snake also stood up and moved its body in the metal cage, raising its head. Its jet-black body was suffused with a dazzling luster, and its raised head and abdomen were revealed to everyone. A blood-red line extended from its lower jaw, exposing itself to everyone's sight. Burial of red flowers. Almost in an instant, everyone's eyes were filled with horror as they stared at the snake that was curled up in the iron cage. Their faces were filled with disbelief. Looking at the flower burial snake, it was probably already an adult. No wonder this person dared to boast that it was the number one poisonous snake in the world. No one would have dared to think that this person was actually going to tease the flower burial snake. One had to know that the fangs of the flower burial snake were extremely poisonous. Moreover, it was a highly toxic poison without any antidote. Death was certain. No one dared to provoke the flower burial snake, but this person actually wanted to tease it. Everyone, do you understand now? This is the world-famous flower burial snake. That person looked at everyone's expression and knew that he had successfully attracted everyone's attention. Some people even exclaimed that someone actually dared to tease the flower burial snake. One by one, the people on the street rushed over. The peddlers stopped setting up their stalls and stood at their stalls to look at the crowd. They were shocked to see the flower burial snake in the cage. They sucked in a breath of cold air. It really was the flower burial snake. Chapter 833. Jing Yu's eyes widened when she saw the flower burial snake in the cage. Just as she thought, this ink snake was indeed a red flower burial snake, but it wasn't her flower burial snake. Jing Yu lowered her eyes slightly and thought of the little flower burial snake that was by her side. Jing Yu missed that little body very much, but why did it suddenly run away? Jing Yu couldn't understand this matter. Was it because she scared off the other flower burial snakes? A group of flower burial snakes. Once flower burial snake left, it never returned. Jing Yu frowned when she thought of this. Why did it turn out like this? Brother, how are you going to tease the snake? Are you going to release the snake? More and more people gathered around. One must know that ordinary people rarely saw the flower burial snake. If they saw it, they wouldn't even be able to escape in time. Ha ha ha. Since I'm teasing the snake, if I don't release it, wouldn't everyone be unable to enjoy watching it? The burly man laughed heartily as he spoke. When he reached out to open the cage, the surrounding spectators all took a big step back and looked at the flower burial snake with fear. Jing Yu didn't move. Suddenly, She saw the people around her retreating. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan also retreated and stood at the front. A burly man beside her blocked half of Jingyu's body. She nervously wiped the sweat off her forehead and stared at the man's actions. Jingyu could clearly hear the sound of the burly man swallowing his saliva. The corner of her mouth twitched violently. Did he have to be so nervous? Jingyu gave the burly man a strange look, then turned her head to continue watching the situation in the field. Sure. The person in the crowd raised his hand and opened the cage that held the snake. He raised his hand to his lips and gestured for everyone to keep quiet. That serious expression on his face caused everyone to feel nervous. All of them even relaxed their breathing and widened their eyes as they looked at the huge body of red burial flower that was slowly moving out of the cage. It was at this moment that the man took out a stick from somewhere. There was a rope hanging from the stick. Jingyu watched as the man made strange noises and walked carefully, jumping left and right in front of the red flower burial snake as if he was a monkey playing with fire. Jingyu almost laughed out loud. Brother, are you sure you're playing with the snake? Is the snake playing with you? Hey! The man swung his whip fiercely. The whip almost hit Red Flower's body, but Red Flower didn't move at all. It just calmly stared at the man. Jingyu even felt that if the flower burial snake could turn into a human, it would look at the man as if he was an idiot and yawn. However, Jingyu was the only one who thought so. When the others saw the man's actions, they were so scared that they stopped breathing. Their hearts were beating fast when they saw that the flower burial snake didn't move. The man who was playing with the snake also nervously wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Brother, you're really risking your life to make money. Jingyu's mouth twitched violently as she watched the man continue to court death. Everyone, don't be anxious. Don't be afraid. This flower burial snake isn't that scary. That person teased the snake while saying some inexplicable words, which made people even more nervous. Do you see this rope? Today, I'm going to force the flower burial snake to open its mouth. I'm going to put this rope in its mouth and tame this snake that no one dares to provoke. The man who tamed the snake made a bold statement that made Jingyu widen her eyes. Chapter 834. TSK, TSK, TSK. What a perfect death wish. Jingyu calmly crossed her arms and stared at the people in the arena. Finally, the flower burial snake moved its body in the midst of the commotion. It seemed to be uncomfortable in this place. The flower burial snake coiled its body around the iron cage and went up. Speaking of which, this snake was really long. It was at least 3 meters long. Look at its body. Jingyu thought of the flower burial snake. That small body could still be hidden in her sleeves. Shangguan Linglan saw that person's movements were getting bigger and bigger. He looked at Jingyu and asked, Jingyu, do you think we should be good people and dig a grave for the snake tamer? No need. Jingyu shook her head calmly and said, let's burn it. Who knows if the poison will spread? That's true. It would be bad if the poison spread from the corpse and killed the plants. Shangguan Linglan nodded in agreement. The two of them talked as if there was no one else around. They firmly believed that the snake tamer would definitely die. This was an act of seeking death. If he didn't die, it would be a waste of his profession. Jingyu silently yawned and expressed her sympathy. Hey, slap. The person shouted and the whip really hit the snake's body. The originally quiet flower burial snake suddenly shook its head and opened its bloody mouth. Its eyes were filled with ferocity. Aya. The spectators were so scared that they all leaned back and retreated further away from the circle. Quick, quick, quick. Catch it. They finally forced the flower burial snake to open its mouth. Everyone was so excited that their eyes widened. They hurriedly tried to put the whip on the snake's mouth, but the flower burial snake nimbly shook them off. Jingyu slightly widened her eyes. Hey, this snake is really smart. It can compete with my flower burial snake. Sigh. So clumsy. Let me do it. When the snake tamer saw that he had missed a good opportunity, his face was filled with regret. He raised his hand and snatched the rod and rope from the person beside him. He swung the whip in his hand again and lashed it at the flower burial snake. The whip landed on the flower burial snake's body again. Perhaps it was because he used too much strength this time. The flower burial snake was completely enraged. Its sturdy body charged straight at the people, causing the surrounding women to scream in panic. The people didn't expect the flower burial snake to suddenly go crazy. A man beside him raised a wooden stick and was about to hit the snake with a ferocious look on his face.
Stop!
The snake tamer cried out in alarm and widened his eyes. However, it was impossible for him to withdraw his hand. The wooden stick had already landed on Zonghua Red's body. Zonghua Red jumped up in pain and let out hissing sounds. I got it! I got it! Quickly, catch its head. The snake tamer dashed forward and swung the rope in his hand, putting it on the snake's head. His swinging was so accurate that it caused the surrounding spectators to cry out in alarm. Caught it! Quickly, tie it up. The man's face was filled with excitement. He lifted his foot and wanted to step on the snake's head. The strength of the rope in his hand was so great that it caused the flower burial snake to hiss miserably. 5 or 6 strong men in the city were having a hard time dealing with the snake. The sticks in their hands mercilessly hit the flower burial snake like raindrops. It was such a cruel scene, but the spectators only had nervous and excited expressions. They didn't have the slightest bit of pity or desire to stand up for the snake. Chapter 835. Jingyu coldly turned her head to look at everyone's expressions. Mother, this snake is so pitiful. Let it go. A small voice sounded. It was a small child who was tugging at the corner of a woman's hair. With a face full of tears, the child said, Bower, look at this snake. It hurts. Bower, be good. This is the most poisonous and evil snake. Bower, if you see it in the future, you must beat it to death. The woman raised her hand to pat the child's head and said, But this snake didn't bite anyone. Those who beat it are the bad guys. The child said angrily. When the woman heard this, she grabbed her child and said fiercely, Don't talk nonsense. Jingyu quietly looked at the scene in front of her. When she heard their words, the corner of her mouth revealed an incomparably cold smile. See? This is the human heart. Jingyu looked at the snake in the crowd. It was almost tied up by the crowd. Jingyu looked at the tongue of the red flower snake and suddenly felt a pain in her heart. Without hesitation, she threw out the dagger in her hand. The dagger accurately cut the rope that bound the red flower snake. The moment the rope was cut, the red flower snake fiercely shook its head to break free. It opened its bloody mouth and raised its head, letting out a hissing sound. Its mouth was like lightning as it bit down on the thigh of that person. Screams of pain filled the air. The snake is killing people. Run. The burly man who was bitten almost instantly fell to the ground with blood flowing out of his 7 orifices. Everyone was shocked by this sudden turn of events. The surrounding people fled in panic. Everyone ran in a panic. Some people fell to the ground and were trampled. In the end, only Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan were left standing calmly. You were the one who used the hidden weapon. The snake tamer at the beginning saw the dagger stuck in the ground and turned to look at Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan in disbelief. His eyes were filled with shock. So what if it's me? Jingyu crossed her arms and looked at the man calmly. If you have the time to question me, why don't you take a look at the flower burial snake behind you? Jingyu's eyes were filled with mockery. She wasn't afraid of running away. Instead, she looked at the man calmly and said with a smile. The man's expression changed drastically when he heard that. He quickly turned around and looked at Red Burial Flower that was approaching him. The 4 burly men beside him had already been bitten by Red Burial Flower. They were all bleeding from their orifices and were dead. Don't come over. The man gripped the wooden stick in his hand tightly and trembled as he looked at the approaching Red Burial Flower. At this moment, even his intestines were green with regret. He didn't expect the Red Burial Flower to be so powerful. The moment the Red Burial Flower came into contact with the poison, one would die. There wasn't even a chance of treatment. Hiss. Zhang Huahong opened its bloody mouth, revealing its sharp fangs. Its head and body suddenly jumped up and bit down on that person's throat. All of this happened in the blink of an eye, and the moment it touched, it separated. Bang! The man's body fell to the ground. His eyes widened in disbelief as black blood flowed out of his orifices. His death was truly tragic. TSK. We really have to collect the corpse. Jingyu looked at the man who had fallen and silently shook her head and smacked her lips. Chapter 836. Yeah. What do we do now? After Shangwan Linglan saw that person die, her gaze landed on Zhang Huahong. She swallowed her saliva silently and reached out to tug at Jingyu's sleeve. What do you mean? Are you really going to collect their corpses? Jingyu rolled her eyes and said, You're dirtying my hands. Let's go.
But
Shangwan Linglan looked at the flower burial snake that was closing in on them and said with a crying face, This flower burial snake doesn't seem like it's going to let us go. Jingyu raised her head and saw Zhang Huahong spitting out its scarlet tongue as it slithered towards Jingyu and Shangwan Linglan. Its black body glowed with an incomparably moving luster under the sunlight. It's not going to let us go? Jingyu narrowed her eyes and stared at the flower burial snake. Hiss! The flower burial snake turned its head and looked curiously at Jingyu and Shangwan Linglan. It raised its head and stared at Jingyu. Jingyu frowned and stared at the flower burial snake. Strange. Why is this snake staring at me? Also, why did she feel that this snake gave her a very familiar and intimate feeling? Is it because of my abnormal pupils again? Jingyu looked at Shangwan Linglan and asked, Are my eyes black? Yes. Shangwan Linglan was slightly stunned as she stared at Jingyu's pitch-black eyes and nodded in a daze. That's not right. Why do I feel like this snake wants to get close to me? Jingyu turned her head and looked at the flower burial snake. It seemed to be agitated as it shook its head and stuck out its forked tongue. Jingyu's mouth twitched. No way. Why is this snake suddenly so agitated? Hey. I saved you. You can't be so ungrateful. Don't be agitated. What if he opens his mouth and bites me out of agitation? Jingyu looked at the approaching red flower burial snake and felt alarmed. She shouldn't have stayed and watched the show. She should have run with the crowd. It's over. Just a moment ago, she was still laughing and forcing others to die. Now, it's my turn to die. The corner of Jingyu's mouth twitched. She thought to herself, should I run now? But it seems that running now will only anger the snake. Jingyu frowned and stared at the approaching flower burial snake with a cold light in her eyes. There was only one thought in her mind. There's only one way to stop this snake. There is only one way to stop it. Jingyu's eyes turned cold as she stared at the flower burial snake with her pitch-black eyes. Almost instantly, Jingyu's pitch-black eyes turned into a strange color under the sunlight. The strange color of her eyes flickered with a threatening luster. Before anyone could see it clearly, Jingyu's eyes returned to their original black color. Everything happened in the blink of an eye. They only saw her eyes move for a moment before they returned to their original black color. Others didn't see it clearly, but that didn't mean that red flower burial snake didn't see it clearly. The strange color in her eyes caused red flower burial snake to suddenly stop. Jingyu saw that red flower burial snake had stopped moving and heaved a sigh of relief. It seems that the strange color is still useful. However, just as Jingyu heaved a sigh of relief, red flower burial snake, which had stopped moving, suddenly started twisting its body excitedly. Before Jingyu could react, red flower burial snake charged at Jingyu excitedly. Fuck. This strange color is fake. Why isn't it working? Jingyu's expression changed drastically as she shouted. Shangguan Linglan's face also turned pale from shock. Chapter 837. Jingyu. Shangguan Linglan's expression changed drastically. He wanted to pounce on Jingyu without hesitation, but Jingyu stopped him. Don't move. Jingyu's expression changed as she stopped Shangguan Linglan. She watched as red flower snake wrapped itself around her waist affectionately. Affectionate? That's right. It was affectionate. What was going on? Red flower snake wrapped itself around Jingyu's waist happily. It raised its huge head and rubbed against Jingyu's neck. Yes, you didn't see wrongly. It was rubbing against her. It was rubbing against her like a spoiled child. This? Shangguan Linglan looked at this scene in horror, her eyes wide open. This scene was so familiar. The cold body rubbing against her neck made Jingyu's eyes widen slightly. She suddenly recalled the time when red flower snake wrapped itself around her neck and forced her to wake up. Red flower snake? Are you red flower snake? Jingyu didn't know what was wrong with her, but she suddenly turned her head in surprise. She raised her hand and carefully touched the snake's body as she asked. SSSS. Red flower snake spat out its forked tongue excitedly. It couldn't help but tighten its grip around Jingyu's waist. Hey, let's talk nicely. Don't use so much force. I'm going to suffocate if you use more force. Jingyu raised her hand and patted red flower snake's body. Red flower snake obediently let go of her. It raised its head and rubbed Jingyu's face excitedly. Is it really red flower snake? Jingyu reached out her hand carefully towards red flower snake's mouth. Shangguan Linglan watched from the side with trepidation. Red flower snake looked at Jingyu's body and happily rubbed its head against Jingyu's hand. It coiled its body around Jingyu's arm and rested its head on Jingyu's shoulder. Hey, it's really red flower snake. Jingyu widened her eyes in surprise. Red flower snake's arm was very heavy. It wasn't as small as it used to be. How did you grow so big? Didn't you used to have a flower skin? How did you turn black? Jingyu turned Red's body around in surprise. Red flower snake's body had changed so much. She wasn't used to it. Zonghua felt resentful. It looked at Jingyu like an idiot. How long had it been? It's a snake. But they will grow up, okay? It can shed its skin too. Don't you have any common sense? Yeah? Is this the red flower snake from before? Shangguan Linglan finally understood. The snake hanging on Jingyu's body was the red flower snake that Jingyu always hid in her sleeve? Probably, maybe. It seems to be. Jingyu frowned. She looked at red flower snake, who was hanging on her body, unwilling to come down. The corners of her mouth twitched. Didn't this snake run away from Baofeng Temple? Why did it appear here? Shangguan Linglan was speechless. He looked at red flower snake, who was hanging on Jingyu's body, and asked, "What do we do now?" Jingyu turned to look at red flower snake and the corpses on the ground. She said quietly, "What else can we do? We can only take this snake away. Otherwise, we can't just leave it here." Then there are only two outcomes. Jingyu turned to Shangguan Linglan and said, "Either this snake bites countless people to death, or countless people beat it to death. What do you think?" Chapter 838. Let's take it away then. Shangguan Linglan's mouth twitched as he said, as long as you can guarantee that this flower burial snake won't bite, I don't mind if you hug it to sleep. I have a problem with that. As soon as Shangguan Linglan finished speaking, before Jingyu had the chance to reply, they heard an extremely cold voice from behind them, causing Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan to turn around in shock. Xiao-chun? Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan turned their heads and saw two people standing not far away, one in front and one behind. They were similarly dressed in black and had the same expressionless face. The corner of Shangguan Linglan's mouth twitched fiercely. She was extremely suspicious in her heart. For Second Xing to become so cold, he must have learned bad things from Ninth Imperial Uncle. Get down. Xiao Chun stared coldly at Zhang Hua, who was hanging on Jingyu's body. His dark eyes were like sharp blades as he stared at the flower burial snake. There was a strong sense of threat and killing intent in his eyes. The warning made Zhang Hua shrink its head back. Then, under the shocked gazes of Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan, it slid down Jingyu's body and landed on the ground obediently. It looked at Xiaochun carefully. Fuck. You're already so big. Why are you still afraid of Xiaochun? Jingyu was almost angered to death by this stinky snake as she glared at Zhang Hua with hidden bitterness. Zhang Hua slithered silently to the side and hid like a little wife. Jingyu's mouth twitched. When Zhang Hua was young, she thought that Zhang Hua was quite cute. But now, it was such a big snake. It was even acting cute. Jingyu was about to vomit blood. Humph! Xiaochun snorted and walked towards Jingyu. He scanned Jingyu's body and said, You're still recovering, don't run around? My injuries are fine now. Jingyu lowered her head awkwardly. He was ignoring her this morning and now he was acting like this. How annoying. Xiaochun frowned as he lifted Jingyu's chin in front of everyone and said, Are you still angry at me? No. Jingyu's face turned red when she saw Xiaochun's actions. She quickly dodged Xiaochun's hand. Xiaochun suddenly pulled Jingyu into his embrace and hugged her tightly. Aya! Jingyu exclaimed as her nose bumped into Xiaochun's shoulder. Her body trembled slightly as she felt Xiaochun's warm body and his heavy heartbeat. Her heart softened and she smiled faintly as she hugged Xiaochun's waist. Ahem. Shangguan Linglan coughed a few times as a reminder when he saw the two of them hugging as if there was no one else around. Jingyu released her hands without a change in her expression. She turned to look at Zhang Hua and said, You still have to keep this fellow by your side. Don't let it hang on you. Xiaochun frowned and said unhappily, Just put it in a metal cage. Jingyu stared at Xiaochun speechlessly. In the end, Jingyu, hurry up and get Zhang Hua off me. Shangguan Linglan was almost howling as he held on to Zhang Hua's tail. His body was stiff as he moved forward step by step. Xiaochun, is this really okay? Jingyu heard Shangguan Linglan's howls and her mouth twitched. She looked at Xiaochun with a conflicted expression. She wanted to turn around to take a look, but Xiaochun grabbed her shoulders tightly and didn't let her look. Chapter 839. I can see that she's enjoying it a lot. Otherwise, why would she scream so loudly? Xiaochun said expressionlessly. Enjoying it a lot. Screaming so loudly. When Jingyu heard Xiaochun's words, why did it sound so strange? Xiaochun, you're going to die. When Jingyu seemed to have thought of something, her face suddenly turned red and she raised her hand to slap Xiaochun. Did I say anything? Xiaochun was baffled by Jingyu's slap. He raised his hand to grab Jingyu's small hand and looked at Jingyu in confusion. When Jingyu heard Xiaochun's question, her face turned even redder. She giggled a few times and quickly walked away. Jingyu and Xiaochun's group went back to buy some things they needed for tomorrow and headed back to the inn. On the way back, Jingyu could only hear Shangguan Linglan's crazy screams. Behind her, Xing Er hugged the sword in his hand and silently stared at Shangguan Linglan with a faint smile on his face. When they returned to the inn, it was already night time. Jingyu finally put the burial flower down and put it in a room. Shangguan Linglan immediately ran away as if he had seen a ghost. His appearance made Jingyu laugh loudly. Why was this little girl suddenly so afraid of snakes? Jingyu and Xiao Qin's group sat together to discuss the matter of entering Luan City tomorrow. After thinking about it, Jingyu felt that there was no need for any disguise. Luan City was a well-deserved city of chaos. Actually, I really want to know, Jingyu said as she slightly raised her head and said, my abnormal pupil's evildoer. If placed in Luan City, will it be the same as in the outside world? You are. Xiao Qin frowned slightly. He turned his head and looked at Jingyu with a burning gaze. Different pupils. If they really appear in Luan City, I'm afraid it will be the same as the outside world. However, the same mentality will be the same as the outside world. Jingyu frowned in confusion. Compete. Xiao Qin faintly spat out 2 words and said, in Luan City, the strong are the kings. The ability to tame beasts with different pupils has long been known to everyone. If one can snatch the other pupil, one will have the help to become the king. With such a temptation, who wouldn't want to snatch it? Fight for it? Jing Yu's eyes lit up. Suddenly, she seemed to have thought of something. Her lips curled into a faint smile as she said, perhaps, this Luan City will be a turning point. If I can borrow the pressure of Luan City, I can stimulate the beast-taming ability in my body. Jingyu said as she slowly reached out to touch the corners of her eyes. Jingyu clearly understood the power of the other pupils. It was very, very powerful. Right now, she only controlled 1/10,000th of it. Jingyu's words caused the eyes of Xiao Qian and the others to light up. They looked at each other and revealed a serious expression. It seemed like this trip into Luan City was not just to save people. It was also to train. Since that was the case, why bother to pretend? Luan City, regardless of whether it was in Tokyo or the other 4 countries, its reputation was quite resounding. In a city of chaos, the people who entered Luan City were all murderers who licked blood from their blades, or some extremely vicious people. If an ordinary person entered, they would either be tortured to death or their savage heart would be stimulated and become an even more vicious person. The strong survived, and the weak could only be bullied and humiliated. This was the truest portrayal of Luan City. After exiting Baluo City and entering the forest from the west, Jingyu and Xiao Qin's group rode their horses and slowly advanced forward. The closer they got to Luan City, the fewer tree trunks and bare leaves they could see. Chapter 840. Jingyu sat on her horse and stepped out of the forest step by step. With a glance, she saw a city standing in the middle of the black soil on the plains. Looking from Jingyu's direction, she saw that the city seemed to be built with black stones. Luan City, black soil. It is rumored that killing is second nature in Luan City. Every day, countless people are killed. Over time, the blood seeped into the ground, causing it to no longer be able to grow any vegetation. The area within 5 miles of Luan City has also completely turned into a land of death, a land of black soil. Xiao Qin slightly raised his head and looked around as he spoke. Jingyu and Shangguan Linglan raised their eyebrows in surprise. This rumor was really frightening. If that's the case, how many people have died in Luan City? Shangguan Linglan said in surprise. Where are the corpses of these people buried? Buried? Jingyu sneered and slightly raised her head to the left. She said to Shangguan Linglan, look at what's over there. Vultures? That's... Shangguan Linglan's face slightly paled as he stared at the scene in front of him. On their left, not far away, there was a large group of vultures and crows circling in the sky, letting out sharp cries. Below these vultures, there were dozens of broken corpses lying on the black soil. The vultures and crows stood on the corpses and ate the flesh of the corpses. In the end, only the bones were left, which were cleaned up by wild wolves or other wild beasts. The people of Luan City call this a sky burial. Xiao Chen looked at the scene in front of him and said indifferently, throwing the corpses out for the vultures and crows to eat. It's a sky burial. What? What is that? Shangguan Linglan's scalp went numb as he looked at the two corpses hanging on the tall, withered tree. The corpses were full of white corpse worms. Shangguan Linglan trembled violently and looked at Jingyu and Xiao Chen as he asked, "This is a punishment and also a warning to outsiders." Xiao Chen looked at the corpse hanging on the tree and narrowed his eyes. These two people must have committed some unforgivable crime in Luan City for them to be punished like this. Did you see that? The vultures and crows won't eat these two corpses. Xiao Chen narrowed his eyes and said, "That's because the people in Luan City sprinkled a powder on the corpse. The vultures and crows hate the smell. That's why it's like this." These two people were hung up while they were still alive. Then, they were made to experience hunger, heat, cold, and pain. They experienced the process of their own death. Finally, they died and their corpses dried in the wind. This is their punishment. When Xiao Chen finished speaking, Jing Yu and Shangguan Linglan's expressions changed. Pervert. Jing Yu's mouth twitched fiercely. In the past, the perverts she saw here were one by one. But now, the perverts here were a bunch of them. What crime did they commit to receive such a ruthless punishment? Shangguan Linglan silently swallowed his saliva and looked at Xiao Chen as he asked, "For example, raping someone's wife is the biggest crime." Xiao Chen turned his head slightly and looked at Luan City, which was standing in the black soil, and said, "In Luan City, they can wantonly sleep with women, but they can only do it willingly. They can't force other people's women. This is the rule." Chapter 841. Actually, compared to the outside world, I yearn for Luan City even more, Xiao Chun said as he slightly raised his eyebrows. He turned to look at Jingyu and said, "Are you ready to go in?" "Of course, I am also looking forward to it." Jingyu's eyes were filled with a smile. In the blink of an eye, her pair of pitch-black eyes turned into two colors, one gold and one green. She looked at Xiao Chun with a faint smile on her face. She raised her hand and took out a piece of light muslin from her bosom. She took out two hairpins and hung the long piece of muslin on her face, blocking Jingyu's eyes. The black muslin fluttered and Jingyu's strange eyes, which were hidden behind the muslin, flickered with a threatening luster. She was dressed in black and sat on the horse with her black hair fluttering in the wind. "Let's go." Jingyu raised her head slightly and looked at Luan City in front of them as she said indifferently. Jingyu and Xiao Qin's group rode their horses towards Luan City. The closer they got to Luan City, the stronger the smell of blood in the air. Jingyu and her group could see Luan City more clearly as they got closer. Looking at the city in front of them, they realized that it looked like a black stone from afar. In fact, it wasn't. The city was dyed black by blood. Just how deep did the blood have to be to dye the city so red that it was black? Jingyu stood in front of Luan City's gate and watched as the tightly shut gate slowly opened. A bloody smell wafted over, causing Jingyu to frown slightly. She led her horse and slowly stepped into the city. However, a few people suddenly appeared and blocked her path. "You can't ride a horse in Luan City. If you want to ride a horse in, you have to pay 100 taels of silver." The leader of the group carried a broadsword and stared fiercely at Jingyu and Xiao Qin's group as he spoke. "Huh." Jingyu's lips curled into a disdainful smile when she heard this. She said, "What if I don't pay and insist on riding a horse?" "Hee. Since you have come to our Luan City, you must abide by the rules of our Luan City." When the big man saw Jingyu refuse, not only did he not get angry, he even revealed a very excited smile. He licked his lips and his eyes were filled with a blazing light. "Rules?" Jingyu looked at the burly man expressionlessly, then went around him and continued forward. When the burly man saw Jingyu's actions, The bloodthirsty look in his eyes became even more intense. Without another word, he raised his sword and was about to chop down on Jingyu's horse. Swoosh. Chi. Almost in the blink of an eye, under the situation where no one could see clearly, a black shadow suddenly flashed by. The crowd of people who were lying at the city gate to watch the show widened their eyes in horror. Hey, you're courting death. Jingyu glanced expressionlessly at the large man whose eyes were filled with fear. She coldly spat out these words. The group of people walked past the few people blocking their way and calmly headed into the city. The people who heard the news stretched their necks one by one to look at the entrance. The person who had his back facing them finally fell to the ground with a loud bang under everyone's puzzled gaze. A red mark opened up on his neck and bright red blood flowed all over the ground. Hiss! The surrounding people looked at the few people who had fallen in an instant and widened their eyes. What a ruthless method! What a precise method! When the crowd saw Jingyu and Xiao Qin's group in the distance, their eyes revealed a grave expression. It seemed that another powerful person had entered Luan City. Some of the people who were standing at the city gate went forward to take a look at the few people's wounds and were speechless. Throw them out and bury them. The crowd raised their heads and looked in the direction that Jingyu and Xiao Qin had left. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.